Dear learners, in the last part we discussed the summary and the themes that were dealt in George Meredith's novel The Egoist. In this part, we discuss the characteristics of the main protagonist and the other characters in the novel. We also look at the social relations that prevailed in 19th century England. Sir Willoughby Pattern is the main protagonist of George Meredith's The Egoist. He is the scion of the Pattern family and resides in the Pattern Hall. He is in his mid-30s. A very wealthy man, Mr. Willoughby has inherited his family's wealth. He has also inherited the title Baron. Willoughby is a man of cultivated status. He attended college and procured a university degree. He is a dandy who was always dressed immaculately. The Pattern Hall has an exhaustive library and also houses one of the best collections of wine in England. The wine is very expensive. However, Willoughby has a tragic flaw. He is an egoist whose ego is quite strong. He does not take no for an answer from anyone. The ego leads him to disown his own relations. Willoughby is always in search of people who will do his bidding. At times, his decisions are quite irrational. Despite knowing the Crossley pattern, the son of a marine is best suited for a career in the navy. Willoughby refuses to educate him. He wants to make Crossley a gentleman who pursues no skill or art. He stubbornly refuses to accept the fact that Crossley, who was poor, required a career. Likewise, he wanted Vernon to abandon literary pursuits and instead work at the Pattern Hall as his secretary. Willoughby loves to speak to people and impose his ideas upon them. He is in search of listeners all the time. Given Willoughby's high-handedness, women who are initially charmed by him decide to stay away from him. Both Constantia Durham and Clara Middleton are tired of his philosophical insinuations and break their promises to marry him. Willoughby is also petty-minded. He is inconsiderate to the feelings of others. He fires people when he feels like getting rid of them. Willoughby abandons his cousin, a mariner, because he is disappointed with the way he dresses. Willoughby abandons the young Crossley because he has helped Clara escape the Pattern Hall. Willoughby similarly banishes his carriage driver Flitch from his estate. Likewise, Willoughby insults the affections of Laetitia Dale. Willoughby uses Laetitia as and when it suits his purpose. There is also an evil streak in Willoughby. He does not think twice before he suspects the loyalty of Colonel de Craye. He assumes that the colonel is having an affair with Laetitia. Towards the end of the novel, Willoughby, insensitive to the conventions of marriage, proposes to Laetitia even as he is engaged to Clara. When Clara confronts him, he reluctantly releases her from the engagement. At the last minute, he seeks to punish Clara. Assuming that Clara is in love with the colonel, he orders that she should marry Vernon. Thus, we come across Willoughby as a self-conceited megalomaniac who was finally cut down to his size. Dear friends, now that we have examined the character of the main protagonist, let us now look at the other characters, beginning with the character of Clara Middleton. Clara Middleton is the heroine of the novel. An 18-year-old, beautiful and bright lady, she is the chief character of The Egoist. She is the only daughter of Reverend Dr. Middleton, a scholarly gentleman who is not in touch with the ways of the world. The free-spirited Clara is wooed by Sir Willoughby. Despite the difference in their age, Clara fell for Willoughby's charm. When Willoughby, who has returned from a tour around the world, meets her, Clara is thrilled. As Clara seeks companionship and friendship, she consents to stay at the Pattern Hall during the engagement period. Clara is disappointed with Willoughby. She resents it when he tries to impose his views on her. She figures out that Willoughby is an opportunist. Clara enjoys the company of Vernon and Crossjay. She takes a genuine liking to Vernon Whitford. On the issue of Crossjay's future, she speaks her mind out and argues with Willoughby. Clara's speech angers Willoughby, who is stunned. He is unable to control the thoughts of Clara. Clara also realizes that Willoughby is trying to throttle her independence. Clara, unlike most other women protagonists, does not adjust to her plight. She makes the right alliances. Despite her father siding with Willoughby, the other men in the novel, including Vernon, Colonel Decray, and the young Crossjay, aid her. She thinks through her situations and tries to escape from Willoughby. She tells Willoughby that she does not deserve him and asks him to release her from the engagement. As Willoughby does not relent, she conceives numerous plans to escape the situation. Despite her efforts, when her requests to be permitted to travel to London are denied, she seeks to run away from the Pattern Hall. She makes it as far as the railway station. Clara is a brave woman. She confronts Willoughby in front of her father and questions him about his proposing a marriage to Laetitia. Towards the end of the novel, as she holds a candle to Willoughby's character, he is forced to release her from the bondage. Thus, in the end, she marries Vernon Whitford, the man whom she truly loves. She is also able to secure a comfortable future for Crossjay. Due to Clara's presence, the reticent Laetitia Dale also finds her voice. Willoughby is shamed and is silenced. Thus, she is the most successful character in the novel. Dear friends, the character of Laetitia Dale is also quite fascinating. Let us examine Laetitia Dale in detail. Laetitia Dale is the daughter of Mr. Dale, who was a tenant of Sir Willoughby. She resides with her father at the Dale cottage, which is located within the vicinity of the Pattern Hall. Laetitia has always been loyal to Willoughby. Willoughby finds her to be his most loyal listener. Though Willoughby does not love her, he pretends that there is a possibility that he would marry her sometime in the future. Laetitia likes Willoughby and is waiting for him to propose to her. In the beginning of the novel, as Constantia Durham rejects Willoughby, breaks the engagement and elopes with Captain Oxford, Willoughby moves closely with Laetitia. Laetitia's presence around Willoughby wins some respect for the Baron. However, Willoughby, instead of proposing marriage to Laetitia, embarks on an international tour. Laetitia is in dark about Sir Willoughby's plans. He leaves her without any prior intimation. She suffers his absence admirably and hopes for his early return. She assumes that Willoughby, on returning to the Pattern Hall, would marry her immediately. However, her hopes are dashed as Willoughby immediately meets her on his return to the Pattern Hall. Instead of broaching the issue of marriage, he informs her that he is going to meet her father, Mr. Dale, to speak about the issue of the cottage's lease. In other words, Mr. Willoughby, on his return to Patterne Hall, has rejected Laetitia. Laetitia stoically takes the rejection. She is the most loyal standby for Willoughby, a woman whom the Baron would marry in case if nobody is ready to marry him. Laetitia, though she is 30 years old, is still beautiful. She is considerate and does not harbour any ill will towards Willoughby. She willingly houses the young Crossjay at her place. Despite his ego, she tolerates Sir Willoughby. However, she gradually realizes the true nature of Willoughby. She speaks highly of Willoughby and attempts to convince Clara about his virtues. Towards the end of the novel, she turns down Willoughby's marriage proposal. After many years of suffering in silence, the encounter with Clara inspires her to find her voice. She is emboldened and confronts the hypocrisy of Sir Willoughby. She informs him flat on his face that she does not love him. She calls him an egoist. Willoughby is brought to his knees and begs his case in front of Laetitia. However, she finally agrees to go ahead with the marriage as she calculates that the alliance could help her father. She extracts a promise from Willoughby that he would reinstate both Crossjay and Flitch. The final episode in the novel points out that she is an intelligent woman whose love blinded her. In the novel, she is the only character that Meredith develops. She was static initially, but towards the end of the novel, she regains her agency. And it is definitely ironical that Willoughby is brought to his knees by his most loyal standby. So, first, Vernon Whitford. Whitford, as we have already noted, is a young scholar of literature who aspires to become a writer. He is poor but takes the risk of pursuing a writing career in London. Vernon is forced by Willoughby to take residence at the Patterne Hall. Willoughby tries to run down his literary ambitions and employs him as his secretary, or rather as his assistant. Yet, Vernon spends his time in the library. Ironically, the idealistic Vernon has more clarity about the prospects of the young Crossjay. Vernon's scholarship wins him the respect of Reverend Dr. Middleton. Middleton spends a lot of time with Vernon at the library in the Patterne Hall. Clara is impressed with the time that Vernon spends with Crossjay. Vernon enlists the support of Clara to argue for Crossjay's future. Thus, ironically, the idealistic Vernon is more practical than Willoughby. Clara gradually falls in love with Vernon, but he does not explicitly reciprocate. However, Vernon knows Clara's thoughts. He is the first one from the Patterne Hall to arrive at the station to search for her. At the station, he does not stop Clara from running away. Instead, he provides her the necessary medication. However, he knows the repercussions of Clara running away from the Patterne Hall. He clearly informs Clara of the effect that her disappearance from the hall could cause to her father and to young Crossjay. At the same time, he does not force his intentions on Clara and even distracts Mrs. Mountstuart to help Clara board the train unnoticed. His actions win in the trust and respect of Crossjay, Clara, Middleton, the Colonel, and of course, Reverend Dr. Middleton. Towards the end of the novel, Vernon is actually married to Clara. One could argue that Vernon is thus the actual protagonist of the novel. Now, let us examine the character of Crossjay Pattern. Crossjay is a young boy who is the son of a marine. Crossjay's family has fallen on hard times. Crossjay's father was humiliated by Willoughby at the Pattern Hall. Willoughby, unimpressed with the manners and dress of the marine, refused to meet him. However, he agreed to sponsor Crossjay's education. Crossjay is a responsible boy who harbors no ill feeling towards others. He is sensitive to the feelings of others. He is sharp and immediately recognizes that Willoughby is a hypocrite. He realizes that he wants to join the Navy and informs Vernon about his choice. Crossjay also takes an instant liking towards Vernon and Clara. Crossjay is the reason behind Clara examining the nature of Willoughby. He is very loyal to Clara and Vernon. He likes Clara unconditionally and does her bidding all the time. Once, when Clara asks Crossjay to wait for her, the young Crossjay stays in the same spot for a few hours, unmindful of the pouring rain. Likewise, as Crossjay overhears Willoughby propose marriage to Laetitia, disregarding the fact that it is midnight, Crossjay stays put and listens to all he can. He races back to the hall to inform Vernon and Clara of the happenings. His revelations alters the situations and facilitates the marriage of Vernon with Clara. Thus, Crossjay, despite his age, becomes an integral part of the plot. His sincerity, courage, and sensibility ensures that the narrative ends happily. Colonel de Craye is a close friend of Willoughby. The colonel is a handsome, confident man. He is invited to the wedding of Willoughby and Clara. Willoughby has designated him as his best man. Colonel appears towards the middle of the novel. He is received by Flitch at the railway station and he brings a wedding gift along with him. The porcelain vase, which is the wedding gift, is accidentally broken when the carriage swerves away from the road in order to avoid hitting Clara. Thus, Clara and Colonel meet each other. Willoughby is suspicious of the Colonel. The Colonel's personality threatens him. However, the Colonel wins the trust of Clara and they take long walks on the estate. Though he is a close friend of Willoughby, the Colonel does not allow his friendship to cloud his behavior. He analyzes the situation and understands that Willoughby is intent on stifling Clara's personality. He also comprehends that Willoughby is a megalomaniac and that the atmosphere in Pattern Hall is not amicable. The Colonel accurately guesses that Clara would have made her way to the station. He identifies her at the station and brings her back to the hall. Willoughby, who is suspicious of Colonel's intentions and is insecure about Clara's relationship with him, assumes that Clara and Colonel have planned to elope. Hence, he jumps the gun and proposes to Laetitia. Towards the end of the novel, as Crossjay informs the Colonel that Willoughby has indeed proposed to Laetitia Dale, the Colonel puts aside his friendship with Willoughby. He informs Clara about the latest happenings and he urges Clara to confront Willoughby and thus is the indirect cause for the happy ending. The Colonel is a man of principle. He does not agree with Willoughby's idea of marriage, and when he knows that his friend is unfaithful, he does not let the relation come in the way. Though he appears only towards the end of the first half of the novel, the charming Colonel plays an important role in the narrative. Let us examine the character of Reverend Dr. Middleton. Critics have argued that the character of Dr. Middleton was inspired by the real-life personality of Sir Thomas Love Peacock, who was indeed George Meredith's father-in-law. Thomas Love Peacock had very little control over the activities of his daughter Mary Ellen Nichols, who was briefly married to Meredith. Reverend Middleton, though a scholar, is not a man of the world. He has a weakness for books and expensive wine. He likes the company of Vernon and spends the time in library. Yet, he is not a proactive man. He is impassive and does not mind his daughter, who is 18 years, marry a much older man. And he allows himself to be manipulated easily by Willoughby. Middleton is unable to understand that Willoughby is an egoist who is stifling the individuality of his daughter. Clara repeatedly informs her father that she does not want to marry Willoughby. Yet, Dr. Middleton does not agree with the fact that women can choose their partners. He is very patriarchal and dismisses her pleas to release from the impending marriage. Thereby, he forces her to escape. However, towards the end of the narrative, when Clara provides him proof of Willoughby's nature, he is forced to relent. Meredith's The Egoist provides us a glimpse of 19th century's social conditions. In the opening chapters, we are informed of Mr. Willoughby's class bias. He has disagreed to meet the mariner at Patterne Hall as he thinks that the clothes of the Patterne are inappropriate. Willoughby is very class conscious. He doesn't think twice before he uses and then abandons Laetitia Dale. From the beginning of the novel, it is apparent that Willoughby's relatives, friends and family tolerate his excesses only because he is a wealthy landlord. Meredith's novel provides us the modes through which the rich abuse the poor to further their own causes. The gentry lived a life of leisure. Despite his disregard for books and knowledge, Willoughby's residence has a well-stocked library. Willoughby hosts elaborate dinners and is more prone to travelling in comfort instead of pursuing a vocation. He treats Vernon, Crossjay and Mr. Dale as if he owns them. Meredith's novel informs us that the tenants, despite their education and exposure, are placed at a disadvantageous position when they deal with their landlords. Thus, Mr. Dale has to marry his daughter to Willoughby to retain the cottage. The narrative also documents the patriarchal attitude of the Victorian society. The men do not deem that women are their equals. They adopt a patronizing attitude towards women. Through a case of Laetitia, Meredith points out that women who were taught to be submissive to men viewed the man-woman hierarchy as a natural one. The Victorian women were provided no agency by the male members of the family. The articulate Clara is unable to convince her father about the situation. The men just do not seem to listen. Thus, while the upper class men like Willoughby and Dr. Middleton were doubly privileged, the case of women like Laetitia in 19th century was rather unfortunate. They were abused by all sorts of men. The lower class men, on the other hand, were despised by the richer classes. Vernon and Crossjay, though they belonged to upper class family, had no money on their own, hence were dependent on their more wealthy relatives. Such men, despite their education, were also abused by the richer men. Hence, they could relate to the travails of women more easily. Thus, in the 19th century, the landed gentry, particularly the men, were rather insensitive to the ideas and feelings of their co-beings. The women, be they upper class or middle class, or rather the working classes, had to suffer in silence. The fate of the women who were dependent on the landed gentry was even worse, as we see in the case of Laetitia Dale. She is 30 and she has been waiting for Willoughby's marriage. Mr. Willoughby thinks that it was his right to decide the futures of all men and women around him. In the Victorian society, the idea of culture and capital was rather different. The upper class and the wealthy had more access to culture, as it is evident in the case of Willoughby. He could, despite having no formal training in arts, afford to keep a grand library in his hall. He could also afford to house Reverend Dr. Middleton in his place. Thus, we see that the 19th century England was a place which was not very conducive to women. Dear friends, we have examined George Meredith's novel The Egoist in 2 parts. I hope you enjoyed the lesson. I'll see you in the next class. Thank you.